and welcome to the Design Rescue Show, where we take a behind-the-scenes look at the unique journeys of creative professionals, and we learn about the choices they've made that have shaped their career paths. Welcome, everybody, once again to the Design Rescue Show. I am your host, David Block, and I'm going to start this one off a little bit differently than previously. Just to give you a little bit of background about me, I am a Saturday morning cartoon generation. I'm absolutely from that generation. I'm a cartoon addict. In fact, after school every single day, I was home watching cartoons. In 1987, while watching one of my favorite shows, The DuckTales, I noticed my name listed in the credits. And believe me, I had no idea what was going on. And it wasn't long after that I also saw my name listed in the Gummi Bears. I had no way to figure it out because it was 1987. I searched, there was no way that I could figure this out. But it wasn't until about 10 years ago, with the help from the internet, that I finally solved the mystery of my famous name and why it was showing up in all of my favorite shows. Which brings me to my next guest. David Block, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, no problem, no problem. So first of all, I just want to start off by giving a little bit of a rundown about your experience, the sort of positions that you've held, and just to summarize your work experience. So you've been with Walt Disney Animation, you've been an animator, a storyboard artist, character designer, an animation supervisor, animation director, supervising director, and a producer.
Yes.
You've also been a director with Warner Brothers Animation, right?
Yeah, for a short time. Yes.
Yeah. And currently you are the president of the Florencita Art Studio.
Yeah, in retirement. I have retired from the animation industry and I've moved into doing landscape painting and seascape painting.
Outstanding.
So, new artistic challenges. Yeah.
Absolutely. And we'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later. I'd like to dive right into my first question, which is surrounding your early interest in animation. I'd like to know if you could take us back to, the time when you were first becoming interested in animation. Was there a specific, like a film, or was there an event that sort of got your interest in moving into that industry?
Well, like you, I loved cartoons, all cartoons, and I grew up in the '60s, so that was kind of a golden age for television. We had the Flintstones, we had Quick Draw McGraw, Huckleberry Hound, we had Johnny Quest, we had the Jetsons. We had shows that were even on primetime television, like the Bullwinkle Show, and Top Cat was on prime time, and so it was a really fun time to watch cartoons, and back then the cartoons were pretty good, and so there was that interest. But I was growing up in a Midwestern town, and it was nothing more than, well, I enjoy watching cartoons. I can actually draw those cartoons. If I saw something on TV, I could draw it pretty readily. But you're growing up in Cincinnati, Ohio, your father's a doctor. The idea of this is something you could physically do for a living never crossed my mind. Until I got to college. So I never took art in high school. Never had any formal art training. People that knew me knew I could draw cartoons. If I saw Fred Flintstone, I could draw him. If I saw, Huckleberry Hound, I could draw. Quick Draw McGraw, I could draw. So I got to college, and I was an American history major, had nothing to do with animation at all. But one day, as a freshman, the movie Fantasia came to town, and I had never seen it. So I went, and I'm 18. I'm 18 years old, and I went in. I went by myself at a afternoon matinee, and I had a moment watching the movie. I won't go into detail. I wasn't smoking anything at the time, and but I definitely something very unique happened to me watching that movie. And I came out of the theater and I made a decision right there and then that's what I wanted to do for a living. Not knowing how or anything, but I just felt that that was what I was meant to do in this world, was make that kind of thing. And so I made the call to the folks. Uh, had some interesting conversations over the phone, and long story short, I did change my major at the university, but there was no animation then in any school. You could really count the number of universities across America on one hand that had any department in animation. It just wasn't like it is now. Now you can find them everywhere. I mean, there are literally thousands of schools teaching animation. It has changed dramatically. But back then, the number of books on animation were a handful. The number of schools were few and far, very few and far between. There were probably no more than a half a dozen schools in the whole country that taught animation. And I found one in Chicago. So Chicago was the closest major town to Cincinnati that had allegedly a department in animation. And they even uh, boasted that Walt Disney had actually gone to this school, which I later found out he actually did for all of like one quarter, one semester, because he grew up in Kansas, and then he did go to Chicago at one point. His life went there, and but Walt took very little school outside of high school, but he was there. They weren't lying. They could say Walt Disney came to the school. It was at the time the oldest privately owned commercial arts school in the country. It had been started in the late 1800s. So I went there, thinking, great, I'm going to learn animation. And that was just a complete fallacy. They really didn't have a department. They had one man who barely knew about animation. Um, but um, the school allowed me the time to teach myself. I could spend hours telling you how odd my first years of animation were. They were quite unusual. I was literally making deals with the administration to give me time. I basically I told them, look, you basically deceived me, and but if you want me to stay here, we're going to have to work out a deal, and we did. And I built a animation stand for back home in Cincinnati. So periodically, I would do my animation in my dormitory room in Chicago, then get on a plane and fly home, shoot the animation, take it to the camera lab, have it back on Monday, and then get on a plane and come back to school and show my teachers and get graded accordingly. So that's kind of how my first 2 years went. Then I transferred to Art Center College of Design out in Los Angeles. I knew that LA had to be my ultimate destination. That's where the cartoons were getting made. So those 2 years in Chicago were there with the goal of I got to get good enough to get into Art Center College of Art and Design because they have an animation department or classes. And so after 2 years, I did get into Art Center, found out they didn't have an art animation department either. They were lying. They weren't lying. They just didn't have anything that was nearly sophisticated enough for me. I once I got through my first semester at Art Center, I showed them my terrible little student film that I did in Chicago. And they said, well, you pretty much have gone as far as we go here. And I just went, oh no, not again. So I dropped out of Art Center. Um, and and then a series of very good things started happening for me. What were mishaps going through the school system, that all went away once I dropped out of school, and I started being in the right place, meeting the right people at the right time. And one thing happened after another, and it wasn't long before I got my first job in animation.
Fantastic. And was it in well, let me put it this way. Let me ask you this. Where was it where you had the opportunity to work with the mentors like Chuck Jones, Abe Lebitow, those sort of people?
Once I dropped out of Art Center, um, I discovered that there was one of the key ingredients to becoming a good traditional animator. That's the guy who actually draws, who doesn't use a computer. You need life drawing. That is a huge requirement to sit in classes with a model and draw the model and do that a lot. So I found a teacher at the Otis Art Institute, which was a very old institution here in Los Angeles, um, with great credentials and everything. But they had a teacher who was teaching life drawing, who was actually a professional animator. And he really was a professional animator. There was no deception here. He actually did this for a living and taught on the side. So I took his class, and I did well in the class. And I had the idea that this guy could connect me with people, and he knew exactly what I was doing, and he wasn't having it. And he was there to teach. He wasn't there to provide an easy out for me in trying to get into the animation business. So once I gave up on that ulterior motive, and just buckled down and ended up being his best student in the class, then he was open to helping me out. At the very end of the class, he dropped a phone number on my desk and said, call this guy. Well, the guy ended up being someone by the name of Ben Washam. Ben Washam was one of Chuck Jones's top animators, had animated on all the Roadrunner Coyote cartoons. He had animated on some of the classic Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck cartoons. He was one of the greats. And Ben was teaching a class out of his home, um, in animation. So I called up Ben, found out that it was kind of a class by invitation only. But I had an in. I had this phone number. I had this connection. So Ben welcomed me into the class. My relationship with Ben just was outstanding. He was my first mentor, and he was much more than that. He was just a wonderful man, and kind of became almost like another uncle to me, and he was just great. But it was Ben who then, because I excelled in his class, got me an interview with Chuck Jones. And I will I won't go into it's a Cinderella story of how I got a job with Chuck Jones, but Chuck Jones did become my first job in the animation industry. And to have Chuck Jones be your first job was fantastic, and it opened many doors for me. It put me in very rarefied air for a young kid. And so Benny was my first mentor. A couple years later, when I did go to Disney, Eric Larson would become my next mentor, one of the nine old men. And those were the two most significant men in my life as far as animation goes.
Right.
But I am definitely a product of mentorships, not the university system. I am definitely a product of mentorships. Yeah.
Outstanding. Okay. Now, my next question is about pivotal projects that you've participated in. Was there any particular project, or let me put it this way: what was the first project that was a pivotal sort of a change in your career direction?
Um, well, there were many. Um, you never know. If I could give some advice to, your audience, you never know when something will come back and pay off for you. That's happened many times. Um, First one that definitely comes to mind is when I could not get a job. The first year I was trying to get a job was 1974, and it was, as I would later find out years later, one of the worst years to try to break into the industry. And I was trying to break into the industry, not knowing that it was going to be a terrible year. But along the way, I met a lady by the name of June Foray. Now, June Foray was the first lady of voice acting of women. There was no one more famous than her. She was the voice of Rocky the Flying Squirrel, of Natasha in Bullwinkle and Rocky. She did voices for Disney. She really was the first lady of voice.
Mhm.
And she was then president of an organization called a CIFA, which still exists. It's an international animation organization. She was the president of it. And when I wasn't finding work, I was looking for, well, maybe I can do something, find a way to meet people in the industry, make contacts, da da da. So I volunteered to work for a CIFA. And in doing that, I met June, and June and I became friends. So that was in 1974. Little did I know that about 1982, so not so much later, but like 1982, I would be trying to get into the Motion Picture Academy of Arts and Sciences. That's the organization that does the Oscars, that gives out the Oscars.
Mhm.
And because June was a governor of the branch of the Motion Picture Arts and Sciences and the animation branch, that friendship that I made with her back in 74, I think I became the youngest person in years to become a member of the animation branch of the Motion Picture Academy. I wasn't even 30 years old yet,
Wow.
and that paid off.
Yeah.
Now, another time when it paid off, and this will sort of get back to your question,
Mhm.
um, when I was working for Abe Levito, I was an assistant animator and I was doing commercials, lots of commercials. And we were working with art directors from New York. And one of the art directors was the art agency, the advertising agency was called Ogilvy Mather, and they were out of New York. And one of their art directors, ad agency directors, was a guy named Michael Webster. And so we're talking now 1975. And I met Michael at lunches. I was the assistant to the animator. The three of us would get together for lunch. I was just the kid. I was,
Mhm.
I'm going along. And, but I met this man named Michael Webster. And then in 1984, so 76 to 84, not even 10 years later, I was walking down the halls of the Walt Disney Studios. And who's coming the other way? Michael Webster, who had just been hired by the president of Walt Disney TV to put together a new division called Walt Disney Television Animation. Didn't
Mhm.
exist yet, but he was being hired to do that. And he sees me and remembers from, what is that, 8 years ago, something like that, and
Wow.
says, David Block? And I go, Michael Webster? And he says, yeah. And we stood in the hallway and talked for about 30 seconds. And he said, I'd like you to stop by my office when you have a chance. And I go, okay. So I go by his office later, and he says, I'm interested in you being an integral part of this new division that I'm putting together. He just decided that practically on the spot, that here I was, now a Disney animator. He's trying to put something together, and he already knew what he wanted to do with me.
Mhm.
So again, this having the lunch with Michael Webster a few times, a couple of years later, I run into him. Now that changed my life because I had been at feature animation from 77 to 84. And by Christmas of 84, Michael Webster was offering me this job to be the first person ever to go to overseas and train a whole studio in the Disney way
Wow.
and produce the first ever Disney TV Saturday morning show called Disney's Adventures of the Gummi Bears. So that was a life-changing moment, meeting Michael in the hallways. Um, there were other things. Animating on Mickey's Christmas Carol at features. That was before I went to Disney TV.
Mhm.
But being on that project was pretty life changing. Put me among some of the really better animators. That was a select group of animators that were chosen to work on that. And I think of the ones, well, Mark Henn and I had the same, we hadn't been at the studio. Well, I had been at the studio longer than Mark, but Mark was very, very talented. But all the guys that got to work on Mickey's Christmas Carol were very seasoned animators of my generation. We were all the same age, but they had gotten to Disney even earlier than I had and had a few more things under their belt. So to be among that very small select group was very good for my career.
That's
And
wonderful.
that was a great time.
Yeah.
Great time.
Outstanding. Well, that's great. So, uh, um, I actually I've watched a lot of your previous interviews, or as many as I can locate, and I noticed you talked a little bit about your experiences with the Black Cauldron and the Gummy Bears and things like that. If you're enjoying this video, please take a moment to hit that like button, leave a comment below, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our future videos. Thank you. The Black Cauldron, by the way, I just want to say, when that came out, that was really powerful for me, and it stuck with me. And so I'm curious about your experience with both productions, Gummy Bears, Black Cauldron. How did they differ?
Oh my God.
I know, loaded
You're
question.
literally, yeah, apples and oranges. But it's so ironic that you love the Black Cauldron. I was interviewed back in December, um, and the interviewer, he loves the Black Cauldron, and uh, so he was curious. I'm not shy about talking about the Black Cauldron, and it was a it was a doomed project. Um, it was um, it was the creative management leadership slash leadership of that film uh, were people that had survived the studio greats. Uh, all the greats that had really made Disney have retired or died. They had these were men that started on Snow White and continued up through the Fox and the Hound in some cases. But yeah, some of the nine old men were still there for the Fox and the Hound. So, and some of them even got onto development of the Black Cauldron. But by the time the Black Cauldron was really ready to go, they had retired or died. And the only guys left from that that period of time were guys that weren't very good, or just would make terrible creative decisions, but they were in power. And so at first we thought, we're in good hands. These guys have been around a long time. These guys go back a fair amount. But God, they were making such dreadful decisions. And so um, I came off of the Fox and the Hound like all the other young animators, and we had been very excited about the Black Cauldron. The We had been on the Fox and the Hound. Fox and the Hound is based on a book, okay? And if you read the book and you see the movie, there's a huge difference, and there needed to be a huge difference because the original book is very adult and has a very dark ending. I mean, it's not pretty. It's not a Disney ending at all. So then we picked up the books that the Black Cauldron was based on. There were five of them, I think, called the Prydain Chronicles,
Oh,
and they read great. They're really fun to read. They're not as sophisticated as Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit, but there's a part of it's kind of like that in a more um, not quite so sophisticated way. It tells a good story. And so we were very excited about, oh man, this is going to be our Sleeping Beauty. This is going to be great. It's got not goblins, but it had creatures in it, and magic and mysticism and all that good stuff. So we were very up about it. And then as we started getting an inkling as to what these guys were doing with the story, it was like, boy, you're really working hard to ruin this.
oh no.
Um, and and before very long, it became the movie you didn't want to be on. Um, and that's where Mickey's Christmas Carol was kind of life changing because there were literally animators on the Black Cauldron that worked on that film for 5 years.
Oh my
That's
God.
a that's a chunk of your life
Right.
that you're never going to get back.
No.
And um, I came off of the Fox and the Hound, and uh, we had some downtime as we came off of Fox and the Hound before we had to go on to Black Cauldron. And so I don't know if all of us felt that way, but it was common to start playing around with the characters that you were interested in working on. So you got nothing else to do, go animate something. So I did, and I took it to the director, showed it to him, and he said, "Well, that's not going to be the kind of animation we're going to be looking for." And I went, "Oh, okay, all right." And I walked out of the room and I thought, I remember it like it was yesterday. I walked out of his office and I went, got to get off this movie.
Yeah.
And fortunately, Mickey's Christmas Carol was there, but I wasn't on it yet. So I spent day and night busting my ass doing a new test, a piece of, independent animation of Scrooge. And I did a little bit and I showed it to that director, and just that passion and that motivation to want to be on his movie was enough for him. And he said, "Okay, Dave, welcome to Mickey's Christmas Carol." And not only was that a great project to work on, I mean the best,
Yeah.
um, that it took me away from the Black Cauldron for a period of time where I didn't have to work on it. And then when I did have to work on it, I had Mickey's Christmas Carol as on my resume now, and that was a really great thing to have on your little Disney pad of paper. And so I got a good character. I mean, immediately they said, "Oh, Dave Block's coming on Black Cauldron. He just did this and this. Let's give him a comedic character." So they gave me the character. You know the film very well, so they gave me Fluter Flam.
Oh, he's nice, isn't he? What's his name? Realize who I am. I shall sing of your dastardly deed. I'm Fluter Flam, minstrel of minstrels, balladeer to the grandest cox in all the land. And well, you've forgotten. I have sung in some of the finest courts.
He's the minstrel. He's one of the comic reliefs. And I was doing his introduction, which is always fun, especially if he's, all things considered, on the Black Cauldron, he was considered a juicy character. So I got to do him for a while. And then they said, okay, Dave can also do cute. So let's give him Henwin the magical pig.
For Prydain, not waiting hand and foot on a spoil. Hey! Oh, all right, Hen. I didn't mean it. You'd better eat it. Dorby made it especially for you. Is this to be my life?
From you, I do beseech knowledge that lies beyond my reach. Look, sire, it's working. The Black Cauldron, so it does exist.
And that's the thing that sort of kicks off the whole story. This pig can put his nose into a dish of water and visions come out and all this nonsense. So I did Henwin, and that was okay. I mean, if you have to be on Black Cauldron, I got some very good assignments. And then the director of Mickey's Christmas Carol was going on to Basil of Baker Street, and which would later Jeffrey Katzenberg would change the title to The Great Mouse Detective, which was a terrible choice, but anyway, it was what it was.
Yeah.
And so that director went on to Basil, and he asked for me. And so I got onto Cauldron very late, and I got off of Cauldron early to go work on Basil. So all in all, that was I actually had a perfectly fine experience on Black Cauldron, but at no time, it's weird to work on a movie that you don't believe in and is not going to be a good movie. And there was never any doubt in my mind or many of the other people working on the film that it was going to be a good movie. And ultimately, there are people like you who love it, but it was not a success. It never was a success at the box office. So
there are a lot of similarities in the graphic design as well. If I have to work on a logo project or a website that I'm not into, I completely understand. Becomes very difficult. So
it had the potential to be such a good movie. And that's what was always in the back of our minds was this is what it could have been, something so fantastic. And look what they've done to it. So that's it.
Well, I'll tell you, Gurgi stuck with me.
Okay. Well, he was also a character that if you had to be on the Cauldron, he was good. Yeah, I did not work on him, but there were two people who did a lot on him. Yeah.
So then for the Gummi Bears, now that was a how many episodes did you work on for the Gummi Bears? Did you
a lot.
A lot of them. Okay.
Almost, except for the third. Well, let's see. All right. So we did 13 on the first season. I worked on all of those.
Okay.
And then the second season, I worked on the first show of the second season. And then I got promoted to director and went to DuckTales. So I left Gummy Bears completely and worked on and directed on DuckTales. And that was that took a while. And then Gummy Bears had a third season. The second season, I believe it was either another 13 or maybe just 10 episodes in the second season.
Mhm.
Then the third season, I had nothing to do with that. Not sure what I may have still been on DuckTales when that was going on. No, I wasn't. I was probably on The New Adventures of Winnie the Pooh. But then for the fourth season, I wanted to be back on Gummy Bears. I really liked the show. I had so much to do with its creation. So I wanted to be back. And then I directed seasons 4, 5, and 6. So we did like 65 shows of the Gummy Bears. And out of that, I probably worked on 40 to 45 of those shows. And most of those I directed, but the first season I was the overseas supervisor on it. Yeah.
How long was the process for a single show? Was it a quick process? Because I mean, this was a weekly show, right? I mean, it was
Yeah.
like a daily show, right? I mean, you
No,
had to
no,
produce.
weekly.
No, it
It
was
was
weekly.
every
That's right.
Saturday morning on NBC.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, yeah. And so, so what was the time frame for each show, each episode?
Um, from script to sending it overseas, if I'm remembering correctly, there were 6 to 8 weeks of pre-production. Then the show would get sent overseas. Oh boy. Then we would have a couple of months to animate and produce the show. And then it would come back. And then there would be a week or 2 weeks. Boy, it's been so long since that's a great question. I haven't been asked that in a long time.
Yeah.
2 weeks of post, maybe 3 weeks, because you're calling retakes, you're laying in the music, sound effects are getting dropped in, color correction is happening, and the film gets finalized. And so what is that? That's many months
Yeah.
to do one show. But once it gets once you send the first show, then another show gets shipped every 2 weeks, and the process begins. And they're overlapping, and over in Japan, which is where the show was being produced, you have multiple crews doing the show. So you can't have one crew because there's just not enough manpower for that. So I had multiple crews to supervise and all that stuff.
Got it. Okay. All right. Excellent. I'd like to move on to a different question. Moving on a little bit more to contemporary times. Your
Mhm.
transition to fine art. Now, obviously, you've been doing a lot of painting lately. And have you been doing that for years, or was this something new when you retired? Did you
Brand new,
start brand new? Okay.
brand new.
Yeah,
And
because I
never
was
picked up a brush in my life.
okay, okay. Because
Um,
my next question, which that's the answer, I was wondering if you had an opportunity to work on any of the background art. So no, that wouldn't be a
Animation is a
yeah,
very specialized world,
right,
and I was extremely focused. So even going to school when painting classes were offered to me, I avoided them like they were the plague.
right.
It was like don't complicate my world with painting. I'm here to learn to draw. That's all a pencil is the only tool I want and need. Don't muddle me with other ideas. I don't want to learn them. And I was that stubborn and that narrow-minded, but it was working for me. So that's I wouldn't recommend it to anybody. But as I got older and I got a little more mature, going to museums and seeing great artwork became something I really enjoyed doing, and started wondering, started envying people who could paint. And my wife got tired of hearing it. So, all the years I was an animator, you'd never catch me ever referring to myself as an artist. I was an animator. As far as I was concerned, that was extremely different than being an artist. I wasn't an artist. I didn't think I was. But as I was getting close to retiring, it was like, well, what am I going to do when I put the pencil down? And the answer was, I was going to try to learn to paint. So I took a class. I really liked it. And it grabbed me. It grabbed me almost as much as animation did decades earlier.
Yeah.
So it became something brand new, a new artistic challenge, something completely different from animation. But the similarity is that when you're an animator, you observe the world around you in living things, all living things. An animal, a bug, a bird, a person, an old person, a young person, a child, all those things become something that you are wired to observe, because someday you may have to animate it.
Right.
And one of my favorite examples of that was when I was working on a movie called The Emperor's New Groove. I was animating a character named Kronk, and he was comic relief. But one of his passions as a person in the movie was cooking. He loves to cook. And he has this sequence where he's in a diner and he's back in the kitchen doing short order cooking.
Respect for anyone with vision. That's it. There's just nothing I can do about it.
Oh, wait a second, please don't go.
4 combos, extra bacon on the side, 2 chili cheese samplers, a basket of liver and onion rings, a catch of the day, and a steak cut in the shape of a trout. You got all that, honey?
3 liquors wearing pants, plate of hot air, basket of grandma's breakfast, and change the bull to a gill. Got it.
What's going on?
There's no time to explain. We gotta get out of here.
What is he doing in there?
Come on.
In a minute. I'm still hungry.
Oh, who's cold?
Okay, I'll make it simple for you. I'll have a spinach omelet with wheat toast. You got it?
Can do.
What's taking so long?
Pick up.
Kronk, what are you doing?
Kinda busy here.
Why am I not surprised?
Your order's up.
Oh well. While you're at it, make me the special.
And I used to love to sit at a counter in a diner and watch those cooks do their thing, especially at brunch time, where they got the eggs and the bacon and the hash brown potatoes all going at once. And their skillets are flying, and they're a magician kind of in the kitchen. And so I used all that knowledge and put it towards Kronk, because that's what he had to do. And the storyboards weren't really fleshing that out very well. So they gave it to me and I said, I know what to do with this. And I did. So animation teaches you that. I'm still to this day, I'm just trained that way. I look around a lot. I'm a real people watcher.
Yeah.
But with painting, you start to observe the world that those living things inhabit. So the way the light hits something during the morning hours, during the afternoon, during the evening, suddenly for 43 years, I wasn't looking at any of that stuff. Now I am. Now I'm looking at those clouds, the way the sun is hitting that hillside, and so on and so forth. So it becomes a new chapter in my life of observation. Maybe not observing that bird. Now I'm observing that tree. And it's just an extension of what I did for such a long time.
That's awesome. That's great. So, in fact, I do plan to come to your next show. I do
Okay.
plan to be there.
Okay, thank
So
you.
we're coming close to the end of the show, and
Uh-huh.
I just want to say, first of all, thank you again for your time and for being here and answering my questions and being
My
so
pleasure.
courteous and nice. In my last question, for students, for people that are interested in moving into a creative industry, into the world of animation, do you have any any advice for those that are looking? What should people do? What sort of advice would you give?
Networking is a huge component of finding a job in our business, as it probably is in most businesses, but in ours, it's really important. Um, there was recently a exposition, and it happens every year. It's called CTN. If you can get out to Los Angeles, specifically Burbank, California, there is this exposition that happens every November where it gives young people an opportunity to meet industry people. There's now a second one that happens actually like end of October. So one is in November, one's in October. It's called Lightbox, and it happens in Pasadena, and it's another place to network. So networking is very important. And the other thing is, if you want to do it, if this is what you want to do, you better be passionate about it. You better want it more than anything, because if you're only half in it, believe me, the person sitting next to you is all in it, and they will get the job and you will not. You've got to really be passionate, and that can go a long way. CG, computer animation, has leveled the playing field for a lot of people. You don't have to be a great draftsman to be a great animator anymore. You have to be really skilled at that computer software, but you don't have to be able to draw so well. So that has made it possible for a lot of people who would have been passed over to be very, very good at animating. So I hope
how do you feel about that? About the direction that the animation industry has gone?
I wish there was room for both. There
Yeah.
should be room for both.
Yeah.
There is room for both in other parts of the world. But here in the United States, they have decided that traditional animation is like old, antique. And it's too bad, because it is a beautiful, beautiful medium when it's done well.
Absolutely.
And
They've managed to keep stop motion, which is an analog
It is.
method, right? It is
Yep.
very strange that hand-drawn animation has just sort of disappeared. I would love
Here
to
in the
see it.
United States, it hasn't, because there's no demand for it.
Right.
Kids who really wanted to learn it, oh God, I run into them all the time. These kids in the universities wanted to do that, and there's no demand for it. And so they get to do it as a student film, but then when they come out, who's going to give them, it's so rare to find that now.
Yeah. Well, on that note, thank you
Uh-huh.
again. Thank you
You're
so
welcome.
much. And that does it. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me, David. It was nice to see you again.
It's great to see you too. Oh, and by the way,
Oh
tie.
my goodness.
Yes.
You are indeed a fan.
And yes, I did make this tie myself with my own 2 hands.
Right.
So thank you again. And I'm going to let you go. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you very much for having me.